Hey, Busters, welcome back. It's Azmyth, and once again, it's character rifting time. This time, I am joined by my dear friend, player, and industry icon, Stephen Radney-MacFarland. Welcome, and thank you for being here and being part of the fucking game and just all of it. Very exciting, very exciting.
Yeah,
so
happy to be here.
In other riffs with characters, I think we're going to be getting more into the nuts and bolts of helping them build their characters, and we're certainly not going to be doing that in your case, since you you made the game.
Well, I was a part of a team that made the game, but yeah.
Well, yeah.
I know a bit about it.
And you were involved with Pathfinder 1, of course, so you're very integral into Galarian and all the kind of nuts and bolts of the RPG that has come with the. How many years were you at Paizo?
9.5.
Yeah, so almost a decade of developing.
Almost a decade of
you certainly left your mark on that company, both in and out of the pages of their works. So let's talk about your character. Let's talk about your character. What kind of character concept, or what led you to come up with the persona that you're going to be in Azbusters?
It was a couple of things. One, I have copies of the Advanced Player's Guide sitting around, and they have a bunch of new classes. One of which is the Investigator, and I designed the first edition Investigator, and so I really wanted to kind of see what the new version of the Investigator did, because it was a class that I really fought to get in there. I think it's a really interesting class. I'm a huge fan of investigative stories and like investigative stories. Also, I've been playing a lot of sort of big burly either fighters or clerics or things like that. And so I wanted to play a more cerebral character, kind of not the guy who's always in the front line, but somebody who's trying to figure out how the world or the adventure or the people around him work. Right. And so those were my two main goals: to play something a little bit different than what I've been playing before, and to try out some of the newer Pathfinder rules. And so I thought this was an excellent chance to do that.
Right. I was also surprised to see the Investigator as part of the next group of core character builds to come in the Advanced Player's Guide. I was pleasantly surprised, because I also really liked the Investigator, and the idea behind the Investigator in Pathfinder. It's a hybrid between an alchemist and what?
An alchemist and basically a high or a non-roguish skill monkey is based, so unsurprisingly, the main influence of the Investigator class is Sherlock Holmes, right? I mean, the iconic Investigator. I also was watching, especially when I was designing it, I went back to watch it. I was watching a BBC show called Luther, which it's got Idris Elba playing a detective, and I added a bit of Dad into him as well. And I went back and I read the Sherlock Holmes stuff, and I, of course, watched the newer movies and the newer incarnations and everything else, and wanted to catch that sort of, I know more than everybody else can, and that's how I contribute to the party most of the time. But every once in a while, I can punch you in the gut and roll you down a hill. So that was my main influences for when I first designed the class, and I was happy to see, especially when it came out, it was popular. People I remember distinctly at Paizo, people were like, we don't know if this is strong enough to be a class, and I'm like, well, let me design it, or at least the guts of it, and show you what I've got in mind, because I think it's actually a really fun class. And then when they saw it, they're like, oh yeah, okay. We see what you're doing here now. Yeah, let's go on with it. And so I was really happy when people were like, yeah, there was a good amount of people. That's a class I want to play, and this is a good version of it. And everything else. Yeah. And so, new edition of the game, which of course I worked on. I did not work on this class. I worked a little bit on the Advanced Player's Guide as a freelancer, but I was really excited to see how this class functions in Pathfinder. Second edition.
Right. Okay, so so the investigator is your class, your ancestry. You went with dwarf.
Yeah.
Where's your motivation there?
Um, I, I kind of just thought it would be a fun, have a grumbly, I was watching Luther again, and of course, there's a sort of all of the things that swirl around is this sort of basically iron-minded will of Luther and him trying to, figure out what's going on, and he's got a tendency to bash through things and everything else. And so in a lot of ways I was like, oh, that's really kind of dwarven. And, just that whole background of it. So I started thinking about a dwarf who had all of that sort of hard-minded, no nonsense, but at the same time, he was a bit of a iconoclast, right? Where so for instance, like it's hard to be an atheist in a world like Galarian, but he doesn't believe the gods are worth worshiping. He just thinks they're very powerful beings, and he's very much kind of a baseline humanitarian for a dwarf, where logic and reason is to him the fundamental truths of the universe, and so he's trying to figure it out, sometimes bashing his way through it, in this very intellectual and very odd view for most people who live in that world.
Would you say that he's a pretentious intellectual as an academic, or is he the type of person that enjoys bestowing knowledge on others? Does he hammer that into them, or is he a little more gentle with those around him?
He's definitely a little bit more gentle. He doesn't like bullies. In fact, he responds very poorly to bullies. He's got his pretensions, right? He doesn't talk a whole lot about why he left the Five Kingdoms, why he's heading south, other than to say that he's hoping to find a patron and to finish his book, which he calls the Philosophical Investigations, which he's sort of writing, and and he wants to make his mark intellectually on the world. So he's an odd character. He's very intellectual. He's very bookish in some ways, and very rough and tumble in other ways.
Okay. Well, let's take a look at Theron Glittermine. So in previous videos, we were actually building the character somewhat and going over the different parts of the character and how we came to that. Clearly, we don't have to do that with yours because it is a complete entity. But if there's things you want to touch base on the character, like maybe some of the feats you chose or some of the directions you went and how they reinforce personality and how that manifests in the new Pathfinder 2 system, I'm sure people would love to hear it. I know I would.
Sure. Well, let's talk about him being a dwarf. He's got some traditional dwarven things in there. He's a rock dwarf. He comes from basically a clan of miners and very traditional dwarves from the Five Kingdoms. And he's definitely gone his own route, but he's got that as a core. He carries a clan dagger. People who will take notice will notice that his clan is not Glittermine. In fact, most dwarves who are familiar with them don't even know what that is. He's taken that name for reasons that he won't explain. It's not his actual clan name.
Glittermine? Who the fuck is Glittermine?
Yeah, who the fuck is Glittermine? And so, yeah, I took the Rock Dwarf heritage, and then what is it? I should look at my character sheet because it's in the middle of the day, and I've had my head in other games all morning.
Yeah, sure. We can also go down to the feats here as well.
Yeah. So, and I took Rock Runner. In a lot of ways, like he spent his early days in the mine with the family and everything else, and so I wanted to have that clear dwarven background behind him.
Good dwarven stock.
Good dwarven stock. Of course, for reasons that like he absolutely will not talk about. He's left that place, and it seems that he's probably gotten a little bit of trouble with people. Nothing like, he murdered somebody. We hope, or
Not like Sam
something like that. But he was probably made some comments about the traditional gods and how them and their priests are not really worth the reverence that people give them and everything else. And much like most religious people, and especially maybe more so than religious people, his dwarves probably didn't like hearing that.
An unpopular opinion.
An unpopular opinion.
Yes.
He also, at a young age, he became very fascinated with a lot of human writers, some from Galt and Andoran, and this sort of new learning and the rights of people and the rights of the individual, and which he's very well steeped in all of that. And so he basically took a very non-dwarven turn towards individualism, seeing the world, measuring the world, trying to figure out how the world actually is, rather than what old superstitions and stories tell him to be. In a world that sort of has alchemy rather than science, he's probably very sort of, for his time, scientifically minded. And though he knows he lives in a world of magic, he definitely gives the impression that he wish he didn't. He thinks magic is a crutch. A crutch he's willing to use from time to time, especially if it's a good crutch.
Right.
But he wonders. He wonders at what the price of magic actually is.
Well, perhaps at the core, like you say, perhaps at the core, his atheism is driven by the fact that these powerful beings would not be so without magic.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So he's definitely got to think of that. At the same point in time, these are his ideas. He doesn't, he doesn't judge people. It'd be really hard to judge people. He holds himself to his own standards. He doesn't really hold other people to those standards. He's a bit of a Renaissance, a very tolerant Renaissance person, unless you're a bastard who is bullying or torturing people and everything else. He's got a very hard line on treat people with respect and treat people well.
How does Theron fight? What is his preferred methods when it comes down to violence? What is his preferred methods? Can we scroll up to his weapons package and his actions on the first page, please?
So it matters what's going on. Theron a lot of times doesn't really want to fight.
Sure.
But he knows he lives in a world where sometimes violence is the only solution. So he's got a sap and he's got a club, and he usually either has a club in one hand and the sap in the other, and a clan dagger in the second. And he uses the clan dagger mostly for defense.
Gotcha.
He'd much rather, depending on who the foe is, like if it's some monster that is mindlessly slaughtering people, he'll take it down. But if other people, he'd much rather knock them out. He'd much rather knock them out, take them to the authorities, assuming the authorities are not corrupt,
right.
And make sure that that justice by the laws, assuming those laws are not corrupt, does its place. So he's not nonviolent. He's just very smart about how he commits violence.
Understood. I like that. And on the alignment spectrum, not that it actually matters much, but on the alignment spectrum, on the classic, the cardinal alignment spectrum, where do you see him kind of fitting?
He is neutral.
Nice.
He's definitely, like priests and gods and things like that. He sort of, I guess in some ways, he's sort of an alignment denier. He knows that magic. Yeah, he knows that magic works like that. He notices that things swirl around with alignment, but people really don't talk about it. And he's not quite sure they actually exist. He thinks people tend to pursue their own self-interest, even people we think are villains or saints. They tend to do terrible things if it fits their purposes. He's met beings that don't fit into that mold, and they sort of puzzle him a little bit, and he's fascinated by it. But yeah, he's not a big fan of alignment either.
That's fantastic. I had to write that down. Alignment in there. You gotta throw a little TM on that. Maybe put an arrow on there at some point. That's fantastic.
I'm going to write a manifesto.
Manifesto. Fantastic. All right. So he sounds like a fascinating individual, and I'm looking forward to seeing what is the empiricism part of the investigator. How are the different flavors of investigator? How does that pan out?
Well, there's some investigators that delve more into the alchemical stuff. The empiricist is basically, he's sort of in my mind your classic investigator, kind of Sherlock Holmes. He does a lot of noticing, and you know, like he can step into a room and see things that other people may not see. He's got expeditious inspection, which you basically allows me to make a seek as a free action once every 10 minutes. And so I can walk into a room and yeah, we might be getting into a fight, but I can go, all right, what do I see? Right. And it doesn't mess with the other sort of combat actions that he wants to do. And so in a lot of ways, it builds an investigator who's really big on grabbing all of that knowledge, bringing it in, and hopefully finding something within the strands of that thing that will help the rest of the group, you know, defeat an encounter or figure out a riddle or find the person that they're going after. Or investigators, they're not your, you know, they've got some sort of interesting combat abilities, but you know, they're definitely not your tank. They kind of fit more within the rogue, and because of that, and a little bit of his gray history, I've also, you know, I'm trained in thievery, or maybe I didn't train in thievery. I'm trained in stealth, and so basically, he's sort of the know-it-all character, that know-it-all support character that tries to bring smarts into a typical adventure game where bashing down the door is the first thing everybody thinks of doing. Right. So it's going to be really interesting to see how well it works with the rest of the group.
I agree. Would you say that as a dwarven academic, would you say that his approach to the other races in a mentor capacity is more of like a big brotherly sort of approach, or more of a fatherly, grandfatherly kind of approach?
Probably more of a big brother approach.
Okay. All right. So he's still a vibrant young dwarf, even by dwarven standards. Yeah. But still doesn't play the age card with the shorter lived races.
No. In fact, like, while you know, I'm sure that he's going to be able to, or he's going to come off as kind of stuffy and know-it-all from time to time. The core of him really is kind of a heart of gold, sort of grumbly, cigar smoking, opinionated sort of fella.
I'm having a hard time seeing where you're gaining inspiration for this character, but I'm
well, inspiration is once upon a time I had a guy at my game table who basically, I think I'm one of those actors, like when I role play, you know, like a Matthew McConaughey or a Jack Nicholson, where I basically play just different versions of myself.
Right.
And so it's got a bit of me in it. It's got a bit of Luther in it. It's got a bit of Sherlock Holmes in it. It's definitely got a bit of Brother William of Baskerville from Name of the Rose. And in fact, I think I'm going to make the voice have a bit of Connery in it when I speak in character. Yeah.
So physically, how do you see Theron?
Theron is like for a dwarf pretty unassuming. He wears normal travel clothes. He's got a backpack. He's got a writer's kit in there. He's working on his book. He's constantly chomping on a cigar, either lit or unlit. Yeah, he basically comes off at first as just some sort of dwarven traveler. He's not very flamboyant, even though as you get to know him, you figure out he's a bit eccentric.
A little unassuming. Wears his facial hair in a traditional manner.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, doesn't really stand out much as just another dwarf on the road.
No, and he sort of prefers that. It gives him a vantage point to observe.
Sure. Being unassuming means he's not pinging on people's radars right away. It gives him a chance to observe. So that's pretty damn awesome. All right, so let's shift gears slightly away from our character and to you. In that one of the things that I'm really focused on for this game is to make this kind of a therapeutic experience for everyone. And that all of us get to basically disconnect for a couple hours a week and do this thing and be immersed and have this awesome social experience. So I'm excited to hear, and my question is coming from the development side of the game, what is the thing that most excites you about this experience, and what are you looking forward to getting out of it?
Well, one, we've come together as a group, and it's a great group. There's a lot of just player-wise, a lot of fun personalities, folks that from various strata of experience with gaming, but all of them have a bunch of enthusiasm. So I think the group itself is just going to be really fun.
Me too.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to see what they're playing, of course, and how we all interact. Plus, role-playing games are just fun, even when it's something you do for a living. And maybe at the end of the day, after you've written anywhere between 2,000 to 5,000 words, and you're going to have to go back through them tomorrow and make sure they're exactly what you wanted to say, rather than what you're trying to just pump out. It's a nice because it's a group of new players and they're fun and everything else. It's a nice sort of getaway of I can shut down my total gaming brain, just focus on this guy. I think I've got a pretty good grasp of how I want to play him. I think he'll be fun, and then just go for broke and have a good time, doing some role playing.
Fantastic, man. Fantastic. I am excited. So I think that wraps up this one. I think we're right in there under half an hour where we wanted to be, which is awesome. I appreciate your time pulling yourself away from that 2,000 to 10,000 word experience that you were referencing. And like always, Busters, subscribe, tell your friends, like the videos. There's going to be one of these for each of the player characters, for each of the people. You'll get to meet each one of us just like in this kind of manner. And then the next thing you can look forward to is our session 0, where we're going to sit down and establish that social contract, which is super important. And I think is something that a lot of GMs just didn't realize that was something in their toolbox. And by doing so, we're going to show you how you can strengthen a campaign and strengthen a group. So, Stephen, thank you so much for joining us. And I look forward to that. And everybody, do what you do and keep on enjoying.